Hi, everybody. This is Troy Hubble from Your Dyslexia Expert, and I'm here today to talk about beginning reading. My nerdiness for the day, I'm getting ready for some Dungeons and Dragons tomorrow, and I've also been having a really philosophical debate in which I've gotten pretty close to being able to quote Socrates with a friend of mine, so it's been a good day for me. But again, you're not here to listen to me talk about my own nerdy hobbies. You're here to learn more about reading. So let's talk about reading. You might have seen memes on Facebook like this, where it tries to show you that we can actually read words as long as the first and the last letter are mostly correct. In this one, they're not. And in this, I even actually mixed up the first and the last letter. And we can still read them. And what that's supposed to show us is that it's the shape of the word that's important, not the entire word. So I actually screwed this up beyond what that's supposed to allow. And I'm betting that you can probably read most of it. The man said hello, right? Here's the problem. This is a lie. Not in that you couldn't read it. I'm sure that most of the literate adults or very literate children reading this were able to read it. But it misleads us about how words work. Remember, if you've seen my other videos, you know that there's two pathways for words in the brain. One is the slow pathway, where we sound words out, and the other is the fast pathway, for words that we've seen so many times that we don't need to sound them out anymore. We can go straight for the meaning. And it's different from memorizing. It's a whole nother video, but just be aware of that. The reason that you can read these is because these are all words that are probably in your fast pathway, right? Let's try the same example, but less scrambled. I'm going to make sure in this example that the first and the last letters stay in the right place, and I'm only going to mix up the middle of the words. How about now? You might have gotten some of these words, and if you sat long enough, you could figure it out. But could you go through this? Can you even imagine going through this at a speed comparable to reading? What it says is, overly combustible material is unreasonably perilous. And I picked these words because when we start using complicated words, like we see in text in third grade and beyond, we cannot read by context. Over here, we've got the context for the word like hello. The man obviously said something. Hello is common. This fits the letter. That context is not enough to help us with complicated text. We have to be able to sound out the words. And in fact, the research shows that skilled readers do exactly that. They will sound out a new word, break it apart, and sound it out to read it every time. They will not guess just based upon context. The group of readers that we see who guess based upon context are unremediated readers who have dyslexia. They're using a compensatory strategy because they can't access the words the way that skilled readers do. And with some of the flawed reading programs out there, we have actually created a new class of readers that does this. And I call them readers with dyslexia because their poor teachers were not equipped with the knowledge and the tools to help them read, and instead use some practices that seem fairly innocuous and even helpful, but can yield some very troublesome results. So let's talk about that. Good reading instruction teaches kids the alphabetic principle that letters and groups of letters represent sounds, and that those sounds come together to represent words. When we are skilled readers, we have sophisticated strategies to attack words and be able to sound them out and read them accurately. We only see readers who don't have those skills doing things like relying on context to figure out what words are. And if you can find a text that is sophisticated enough and that is about a topic that they don't know very much about, you will see that people who read in that way really don't read at all. They'll have no idea how to go about the text other than those simple words that they've memorized. And I have seen some very bright kids make compensatory skills work a long ways after they should have stopped working. Usually about 4th grade or 3rd grade is when they stop. Some kids can make them work longer. So on this slide, I made 2 examples of ways that we teach beginning readers how to read that I think that parents are not familiar with, and I think often teachers are not familiar with. One of these strategies will result in readers reading. One of these strategies will not. It will only result in those kids reading who need very little reading instruction to begin with. And that is the difference between decodable text and pattern text. In early literacy, there are 2 kinds of approaches that we see to reading. One kind of approach is called decodable text. With decodable text, we teach kids 1 or a few letters at a time and have them build words to spell them with those letters or sound out words with those letters to read them. And then we start to put those words in context. This would be an example of a decodable text for a student who has just learned the short A sound. Pam and Matt got a hat from the rack. They sat on the mat next to the cat. They put the hat on Matt's head. While many teachers would look at this and find it ridiculous, it is ridiculous, but it's because it's not designed to present kids with material that is good for comprehension. We read aloud to beginning readers to present them with that material. This is designed to help them practice the short A sound in closed syllables. This is pattern text. This is something that you see in a classroom where the teacher has not been given good instructions on how kids learn to read. And I bet that many of you have seen text like this. Here's how pattern text works. We usually get a picture. Decodable text can also have pictures. There's nothing wrong with pictures. And we get a very repetitive sentence. This would be one that we'd be likely to see at a kindergarten level. The patterns tend to get more sophisticated as we advance into a 1st grade level. And here we see the dog got a toy. And I know it's a dog because look, there's a picture of a dog with his dog toy. And I know I can use this sentence to read the next one because the is the same, got is the same, is the same, and toy is the same. I can use my pictures and my context clues to figure out what this changing word is. I can even use the beginning sound of that word. The k. Oh, cat got a toy. And here, the kid got a toy. And yes, that is an adorable cat and an adorable dog and an adorable kid, but I'm going more all over the cat and the dog personally. But anyways, this is how I was originally taught to teach reading. We start with a pattern and we slowly take the pattern away. Both of these seem like they could be viable strategies, but there's a very big difference. With decodable text, we teach kids to pay attention to the letters and the patterns of the letters. In this case, we have an A followed by a consonant or multiple consonants in all of these short A words. What we're teaching kids to do is how to take these syllables, these short words, and understand implicitly. They don't have to be able to explain it necessarily. They just have to be able to apply it. This pattern that when we see an A after a consonant, followed by a consonant, it's going to say ah. Decodable text teaches kids to pay attention to the code and decode the words, to translate the letters into sounds. Pattern text teaches a very different skill. I don't have to be able to read this word to be able to read this sentence. I just have to see that something's getting a toy. I have to have been told that this book is about different things getting toys. And I have to see that this thing is a dog. And I can even say the first sound, D. And I can figure out the dog got a toy. Think about how I got there, though. I did not sound out the word dog. And in fact, this kind of a sentence encourages me not to. Instead, it encourages me to look at the picture and to use my context clues to make guesses about the words. What we saw here from this bottom sentence is that you can use that strategy with simple words in simple text, but you cannot use it in complex text. This actually teaches kids to read the way that unskilled readers do. So, where did this pattern text come from? Why do we need to shift back to decodable text? And how did we get into this place where we have both of these systems to begin with? Well, if you're like many other skilled readers, you probably read this and were like, that is just a silly story. There's not much to teach there. As adults, we forget how hard it was to learn how to sound out words and blend those sounds together. For a beginning reader, this is not too simple. This is exactly what they need, because we are going to give them the comprehension in other ways by reading to them. They need to practice connecting the spellings to the sounds of the words, to crack the code, to decode the words. Adults tend to get bored by this. Kids do not. With pattern text, we can actually move to more complicated text more quickly than we can by teaching decoding. But here's what research has shown. When you use this strategy, you can move forward quickly for a short time, but as text gets more complicated, people who have relied on patterns and context will stop progressing because they didn't learn the underlying skills that contribute to skilled reading and that are how skilled readers actually read. They learned some workarounds that unskilled readers can use to get around not having those skills. And when text gets complex, they stop working. Whereas people who have been taught how to decode start a little bit slower, but then continue to progress and don't stop progressing. And by the end, they overtake the students that have been taught to read in this way and actually read better, even with the patterns. Where this whole idea comes from is a long time ago when we did not know how kids read. Researchers like Mari Clay, who were very good researchers and very well-intentioned, could not figure out how skilled readers were reading. To them, it seemed like magic. They just looked at the word and magically they got it. We now know that's because they had so many words in the fast pathway of their brain, so many sight words. But unskilled readers made a lot of really interesting mistakes. And she figured out we can actually group those mistakes into 3 categories. One category is meaning mistakes, right? Does it make sense? If I say cow, does that make sense with my picture? Does that make sense with what I'm seeing? Does that make sense in the context? No. And as the patterns get more sophisticated, I still rely on the picture, but I rely more on the context of the sentence. I'm still relying on context, and context still only works in relatively simple text. What another way they could break down was structure. The dog got some toys. Well, let's look. Does the dog have more than one toy? No, he has a toy. So they decided that structure was another way that errors could happen, meaning and structure. And the last was visual. Does it look right? Does it look right is maybe the least helpful question that you can ask a struggling reader, because Honestly, they have no idea what it's supposed to look like. If you ask them, does that look right? They'll tell you no, but they won't know why. They'll just assume it doesn't because you're asking them. And the assumption of does it look right is that we do not go through and sound out all of the parts of the word, but instead rely on these three cueing systems: meaning, structure, and visual, with the visual being the overall shape of the word. Exactly the kind of thing that this meme argues that we use to read the word. The problem is, it turns out that that's not true. What it turns out happened is because she did not know how to measure skilled readers and what skilled readers were doing, she accidentally discovered what unskilled readers were trying to do and was able to help them use their strategies to problem solve for the fact that they couldn't read more effectively. She taught them to be very skilled at bad reading strategies. That is what pattern text does. When you're teaching a child to read, you do not want them relying on a pattern. You do not want them relying on context. You want that child to sound the words out. That is always the first strategy. Now, after that, yeah, context comes into play. But in order to be able to use that context, we have to have sounded out the word first. Decodable text directs our attention to what actually matters, how the spellings connect to the sounds. Pattern text directs our attention away from what matters. It's how do we use the context. If you have an early reader, one way that you can know whether they're getting good instruction is based upon which kind of text they're getting to practice. Decodable text is an amazingly useful tool, and we can make it more complex as kids go by incorporating more and more and more sounds that they've learned, or because we know that kids will actually learn a whole bunch about reading on their own when we provide good instruction, we can provide the decodable text that focuses on the new sound and let them use their ever-growing set of skills from reading on their own and inferences they've made from what we've taught them, support them with some of the other words that don't necessarily follow the pattern. Either way, what we care about is directing students back to the text, back to the spelling, and how it connects to the sound. That is why I'm making this video. Too often we use pattern text for beginning readers because for teachers, for adults, this seems to us like it makes more sense and is a more interesting story. We need to use decodable text. We need to use text that is designed for our readers to be able to sound the words out and connect the print to the sounds to crack the code. Comprehension is also vital, but at early stages of reading, we should be reading to kids and letting them explore books as they get better at sounding things out. But we should not use those tools as a substitute for teaching decoding. If you have any more questions about whether your kid is getting good instruction, or how you can tell and how you can support them if you are worried that they're starting to use some of these compensatory strategies, please comment below, and I'm happy to work through with you whatever kind of instruction your child is getting and how to make it as good as it possibly can be. Similarly, if you have any other questions about literacy or about any particular words and why they're spelled the way they are, or how you can help your child with a particular thing that you're seeing, comment about that and I will happily make a video also. The more comments I get, the more I can make videos that are useful to you guys and that are not just about things that are interesting to me. And last, if you know someone who is struggling to read, please refer them to my website. It's linked in the description of this video. I'm here to help, and I'm here to bring my expertise to bear so that they don't fall into the trap of using these strategies and become skilled and efficient decoders and comprehenders instead. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend. If you're watching this on the weekend, it's the weekend for me. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.